Recently I read an article by a business consultant named Peter Bregman. And Peter Bregman writes that one evening he was running late. He was scheduled to meet his wife Eleanor for dinner, but a meeting with a client went far longer than expected. So Peter Bregman writes that he arrived at the table in the restaurant 30 minutes late, and he apologized. He said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to be late." And Eleanor responded, "You never mean to be late." So Bregman realized that his wife was a bit angry. So he went on and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, it was unavoidable. My meeting went over." And the more he said, the worse it got. And the evening just kind of went south from there. Well, Peter Bregman writes that a few weeks later, he was talking with a colleague, a professor of family therapy. And Peter told this professor what had happened. And he just smiled. And he said, "You made a classic mistake. You stayed stuck in your own perspective. You didn't mean to be late, but that's not the point. The point, and what's important in your communication, is how your lateness affected Eleanor." So in other words, Peter was focused on his own intentions. Eleanor was focused on the consequences of the lateness, and the two of them were in two different places that evening. Peter Bregman goes on to write this. He says, "I now see it as really quite simple. When you've done something that upsets somebody, no matter who's right, always start the conversation acknowledging how your actions have affected others. Save the discussion about your intentions for later, much later, maybe never. Because in the end, the intentions don't matter." So Bregman writes, "What should I have said to Eleanor? Maybe something like this: 'I see that you're angry, and I'm really sorry that you had to wait for me for 30 minutes, and that's got to be frustrating, and it is not the first time. And I can also see that it seems like I think that being with a client gives me permission to be late. So I'm really sorry that you had to sit here waiting for so long.'" And then he concludes. "What I've found is that once I expressed my understanding of the consequences of what I did, my need to justify everything with my intentions was gone. And that's because the reason for explaining my intentions was to repair the relationship, and that's already been accomplished by empathizing with my wife's experience. At that point, we were ready to move on." And he says, "After that conversation with Eleanor, after really understanding her experience of the consequences of my lateness, After that, somehow, some way, I've managed to be on time, much more frequently. Well, I came across that, and in my reading, I think it is a very good life lesson for all of us. And I think it helps us to appreciate what Jesus is getting at in the gospel today. You know, when we put that passage in context today, Jesus is saying, be alert to the consequences of your behavior. Be aware of the effects of words and actions on the other person. And if we set out to tend others well, no matter who they are or what they've done, then we're ready for the coming of the Son of Man. And if we make amends for behavior that has hurtful consequences on others, then we're prepared for meeting God at that unknown hour. So, I imagine Jesus saying, don't just talk about intentions, and certainly don't make excuses. Instead, be responsible for what we say and do, and be responsible for the consequences of our behavior.